What's up, guys? Teddy Cornwell here. Welcome to the Underdog Talk. Something about the underdog. Today, we have the White Rhino on this show. But before we get into this interview, I have to give this gentleman a proper Underdog Talk introduction. A man hailing from Portland, Oregon. Today's guest is a top-tier IFB professional bodybuilder and powerlifter. Have to add that there. Today's guest held the all-time Raw World powerlifting records in the 275-pound class in the total without knee wraps and in the squat without knee wraps. I mean, he is one of only 10 men in the world to ever total over 2,300 pounds raw in competition, often referred to as one of the strongest bodybuilders in the world. And finally, the man behind the revolutionary vertical diet. I am proud and honored to present the one, there it is, the one and only Mr. Stan. How are you doing today, man?
Thank you, brother. Thanks for having me on. I feel great. Aging gracefully.
Hey, I can't relate yet, but my bones are cracking a little, so I don't know what's going to go on with that, man.
Yeah, I'm 54 now, my friend. All that seems like a distant memory to me, all of that heavy weightlifting stuff, but I'm just trying to stay ahead of father time, staying healthy. Joints are good, God willing, knock on wood, and I still love to train, so that's what I'm doing my time.
Hell yeah. I mean, Stan, I thought you were going to say you were 23, so that number surprised me a little bit. But before we start, I have to ask, Stan, are you there? There you are.
Yeah.
I have to ask, how did you get the name White Rhino? Like, I can assume stuff, but I don't want to say anything. How did you get that nickname?
That was Flex Wheeler. I think he couldn't remember my name, and so he just called me Rhino, the White Rhino. That's ever since 2008 when I was training with him, and it just stuck, and I've been using it ever since.
Wow. And I mean, speaking of Flex Wheeler, today he actually just said he'll be coming on, so that's a little surprise for anyone who's watching the legendary Flex Wheeler. I mean, I wonder what he would call me, probably Small Rhino. But Stan, I want to start from the beginning. You start your bodybuilding career in 1988 and win the Mr. Oregon in 1991. And it's only fitting you win the Mr. Oregon as you are a Duck, you are an Oregon alum. But in 1997, you stopped competing in both sports in order to pursue business. So I have to ask, why did you make that transition into business from such a different field?
Well, I had always had to work since I was, 12 years old. I had nearly a full-time job at 7-Eleven, stocking shelves and, mopping floors and what have you. Worked at pizza places, construction through college, property management. Back then, certainly more so than now, making a career out of the fitness industry was very difficult. I was a personal trainer. Studied exercise science, was a high school soccer coach. I worked at numerous gyms and I did personal training, but it was really hard to actually make a living at it. And so I always worked a full-time job just to make sure I could pay the bills. And when the opportunity presented itself for me to start my own business, I dove into that headlong. And, one of the sacrifices is that takes an extraordinary amount of time. And so I put bodybuilding and powerlifting on the shelf. I hadn't really anticipated ever coming back to it, to be honest with you. I've, enjoyed lifting, ever since I was a teenager, but it wasn't until it was almost 10 years later, 1997 to 2006. I ran my businesses. I fortunately was quite successful. And just on a fluke, there was a show coming up that I'd always tried to win, the Emerald Cup up in Seattle, big national qualifier. And I jumped in, decided to give it a try, and I did well. And then just having the time and the resources in particular gave me the opportunity to train with Flex Wheeler. And so I took advantage of that and ultimately won my pro card as a result. But it was, it was a full-time commitment. I was not working during that time.
Wow. Now, Stan, I think I have to mention two things. I don't know how many people know, and by looking at you, I would think you lift heavy weights, but you actually almost went to college for soccer, which
Yeah.
baffles me. I mean, were you just goalie and just stood in the goal and blocked every goal? But yeah, and I mean, Stan, I think you're being a little humble. You come back in that 2006 Emerald Cup, actually winning the super heavyweight class, weighing 235 pounds. So, what was the transition coming back after being out of the game while you were still lifting? Being probably older than most of the fellow competitors. What was that like?
It was actually easier for me than it had been previously. I had learned a lot more throughout those years. I had more time and more resources. By that, I just simply mean I could afford to eat the foods I wanted to eat and train as much as I wanted to train and sleep as much as I needed to sleep. And there were no distractions in that regard. And so I actually found it to be easier. I was more focused, fewer distractions. And so that worked out really well for me. And again, I was training during that time, and there was a time period at which I didn't go to a gym for over a year, but that was just one specific circumstance. But most of that time I was lifting, and so I was able to really quickly regain a significant amount of the muscle that I had back in the early and mid 90s before I stopped competing.
Wow. And I mean, Stan, I think something that makes you stand out is I was going to say you're a stud in double categories, but you're a stud in triple categories: business, powerlifting, and bodybuilding. Now, I always love to ask, my guests advice, but for you, I have to ask advices, if that's even a word. So, Stan, I want to first dive deep into the fitness. What is your biggest advice for someone who's just starting their fitness journey?
Well, for me, it's always been consistency, good time management, discipline, and consistency. I think that people try and do too much too fast. And what I've always seen, this goes way back to even when I was beginning the first few years of lifting, they're kind of in and out. They'll do it for a little while and then they'll stop for a little while. And that's just not or they'll get discouraged when they have plateaus. And that, that's just part of the game. And it takes time for the body to adapt and realize new set points, and then for you to overcome those and continue to progress. Sometimes it seems like you'll go, 6 months without a single ounce of progress, and then eventually break through that plateau. And my climb, as you mentioned, I was 140 pounds when I was an 18-year-old freshman in college. My first competition in 1988, I weighed 156 on stage. That was the novice lightweight under 160 pound class. And I split the pack of 20 some people and took like 12th place. So I was certainly no genetic freak in any regard. And my path was long and full of lots of losses. But I used to kind of look at things in terms of long term. I had a 5-year plan instead of a 3-month plan. And that's the way I've been throughout my life with everything that I've pursued, whether it was powerlifting, which again, as a 140-pound college freshman, I couldn't bench 135. I mean, I got crushed. I still remember the day. I was surrounded by frat boys. We were all tackling the bench that day. And I got crushed by 135. I had to take the 45-pound plates off and put the 35s on just so I could get some reps. And, obviously 10 years later, I benched damn near 600. So, but that was a long, slow process. There was not a single time throughout my career that I packed on 30 pounds in a month, like these stories you hear on the internet. I'd be lucky to put on, 12 pounds in a year. That would be a huge gain for me over the course of that time. So I think the biggest thing I see is that people tend to get discouraged really quickly. They aren't consistent, and they don't break through plateaus. They just kind of give up and presume to think that they're plateaued. And so I was very persistent as well as consistent.
And I think, Stan, you hit the nail on the head on that. And something I've learned from talking to people in the fitness industry like you, who've seen it all, been through it all, been at the highest level. They didn't just come they didn't just win Mr. Olympia or come second place in a day. This is training, the most intense training there is. And I mean, at the end of the day, something I've also learned is never compare yourself to others. Compare yourself to the day before. Comparing yourself to others. Like if I compared myself to Stan, I would never be anywhere because I mean, look at him versus look at me. Comparing myself to a week before and seeing that little progress. And like Stan said, it takes time, but every little, muscle gained, every little extra weight lifted is just another satisfaction. And also Stan, that seeing a plan for what you want to do down the future, I think is so beneficial. And I never really grasped how important that was until recently when I started doing it on my own. I go, this is really helping me understand myself and where I see myself. So now, Stan, I want to switch to the business side of you because I think there's many things that make up you, but the business side, what is your biggest tip? Because I saw you transition these small companies into multi-million dollar companies. So what is your biggest tip for someone who is starting their own business? It doesn't have to be a fitness business, a supplement business, just a business in general.
Well, it was much the same as bodybuilding and powerlifting. And I've said before in videos that any successful athlete, highly successful athlete, with the discipline and the consistency and the time management and just the amount of energy and effort they pour into obtaining knowledge and trying things and being very what would I say, methodical about what works and what doesn't, and seeking information and advice from great coaches and mentors, along with whatever education that they can glean from, whether it's school or books or whatever. Now we're fortunate to have the internet and or unfortunate, I guess, depending on how you look at it. But back when I was coming up in bodybuilding, we didn't have that. We read magazines and we consulted people who were, we felt were knowledgeable. And I've said that, anybody who exercises that same kind of commitment, discipline, consistency, time management into any income producing venture, which historically bodybuilding has not been that up until more recently with the advent of social media, could you capitalize and monetize an international audience, which I've been fortunate to be able to do. But back then, it just wasn't a good avenue for to be successful, truly successful. And I've said that if they could use the same amount of commitment on any income producing venture, they'd be a millionaire in 5 years. And I found that to be true. Fortunately, I had good mentors in business as well. I worked as I worked in construction and property management in college, and I was fortunate to have been mentored by a successful businessman who was in the real estate business. And so I learned a lot about construction and multifamily real estate, which was one of the businesses that I started in later years. And so I did have some intellectual property. And I think that's important, that you should have some knowledge. Go to work for somebody or doing something that you intend to be successful at and kind of learn everything about it. And that's, one of the first businesses I started was a telecommunications company. But prior to that, I was vice president of a telecommunications company. And so I had learned everything about that particular business before I started it. And shortly thereafter, I did start a construction company where I was building single family subdivisions and buying multifamily properties and managing them or converting them into condo conversions. And so I was successful at those for two reasons. One, I had the intellectual property. I had prior knowledge and experience in those businesses, and I had managed or ran those companies successfully and saw what worked and what didn't work. And so I knew on a day-to-day basis what needed to be done. So that's very important. And secondly, I applied the same types of discipline and consistency that I tend to be a bit OCD. And so I tend to just keep repeating the same successful behaviors. I find what works and I do it over and over and over again ad nauseum. And things that don't work, I try those too. I've made plenty of mistakes throughout my career. I quickly discard those and I stay focused on the things that do work. And you learn a lot of lessons along the way doing that.
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. Mistakes make us, and also getting in a position where we can learn, I think, is also one of the most valuable things. And I'm in a position right now where I'm learning. So now I want to jump into the next chapter in your life. You start as a coach. Now you are a renowned coach now. And I want to look at the vertical diet specifically. So, how did you come up with this revolutionary diet? And what's the process like creating a diet like?
Well, as it turns out, it was just really a culmination of everything I had learned from over 30 years of college to competing to coaching, being coached, collaborating with great athletes and coaches. And when I was working with clients, I wanted them to have all of this information. It's more than just a diet. It includes, as you know, sleep, hydration, nutrition, digestion, of course, the training involved in that, blood testing. It's very comprehensive. And every time I got a client, I didn't want to have to re-explain everything. So it's kind of what would you say? It's a manual, an operations manual, which I used to have to create for my companies, for everything I wanted them to do as a client of mine, just as I would do for an employee. I'd teach them everything I want them to learn, and that's what I do with my clients. And so I had really kind of built this kind of resource over the years of training, where I sent them, I'd get a questionnaire from them and go through, of course, a lot of their specific needs, but then I would send them in general, here's all the things I need you to do, and here's how you optimize each of those. And that's the vertical diet. And again, it's a lot of lessons that I learned being in the bodybuilding industry about over restrictive dieting and the effects that had on my health and my performance. In the bodybuilding industry, dirty bulking and the effect that had on my health and performance. Of course, having dealt with hundreds of competitive clients over the years, and then ultimately thousands of dad bods and soccer moms and general population folks, I mentioned that I get a lot of feedback from people. I probably answered over 50,000 DMs in the last 4 years, just interacting with people who, some have used the diet, some have read it, some have not. But they ask me questions and I answer, and they give me feedback, and I kind of just almost like you would call it clinical experience. I've been able to kind of see what works for most people. And I always say, what works for me might not work for you, and it works for most people doesn't work for everyone. It's a big challenge of this industry, is that there's a lot of individualism and a lot of nuance. And so really, I just compiled it all into one place, and I was giving it to my clients, and I was updating it periodically to make sure that it was accurate. And ultimately, I partnered with a registered dietitian, PhD, who is the director of dietetics for UNLV and an instructor in the exercise phys department. And we spent hundreds of hours going through all of it, and I made sure to include hundreds of references to articles, videos, peer-reviewed published research, so that people could take deeper dives. I reference a whole host of resources that I use, individuals that I think highly of, that I think provide excellent science-based information. The Dr. Lane Nortons of the world, the Alan Oregons, the Greg Nuckols, the Brad Schoenfelds, and I'm leaving a lot of names out, but there's a whole list of people that I rely on for information, who are specialists in that field, but who also compete at a very high level and train people. I think those are very important things to have in your toolbox. And so I put together just about everything, from spending endless numbers of years and hours and saying, here's kind of what I want you to do. And my clients ask me, when they hire me, they're like, Stan, just tell me exactly what to do. And I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about dieting, in general, all of the nuances. That's not what they're interested in. When I go into a doctor, I don't want them to take me through med school. I just want them to diagnose me, tell me what to do. I'm on my way. And obviously, I like to learn something that's applicable and practical to me. But I don't need to know, my students, my clients, many of them just say, look, they're busy. They've got jobs, they've got kids, they just need to be provided something that they're confident that they've hired someone who has experience and expertise and is science-based, and just give them a plan and let them execute it, and then just monitor them and be there to give them feedback and help them with questions along the way. And what I've found, and what you see in my book is a lot. I've coined the term compliance is the science. So I think the information is important, but I think the application is even more important. How do I help my clients apply this that's consistent with their lifestyle, to create, a simple, sensible, and sustainable plan that they can adhere to long term? And so I spend a lot of time with my clients and in this book just talking about simple, I hate to call them tricks or hacks, because they're just ways to improve compliance that makes this easier for them to adhere to long term.
And I mean, if you guys need verification that this diet works, I mean, this was the diet that fueled the mountain during his strongman career.
Yeah.
Now, we had the Buttery Bros on who met Hafþór in person, and they told me he was pretty big. Now,
Oof.
Stan, I've got to ask you the question. Is he really that big in person?
It's ridiculous. He's probably one of the people who, even as much as I've been around him, every time I see him, I'm just absolutely flabbergasted by how incredibly huge this guy is. I mean, it's 6'9", 440 pounds. It's just absolutely incredible. I mean, his calves are bigger than my thighs. He's just a monster of a human. Same would be true of Brian Shaw when I worked with Brian. I mean, just absolutely monstrous. There's just, what I always thought was funny is that a lot of fans will come to the Olympia or the Arnold Classic, and they'll want to go meet their favorite bodybuilder, Kai Green, whomever. Been out of the industry so long, I'm starting to forget who was even relevant at the time. And they would go meet them, and then they would go over and see the strongmen, 6'5", 6'6", 6'8", 350, 380, 420, and it just puts it all into perspective, in very short order. These people are just awe-inspiring. And so, yeah, it's, obviously we wear it as a badge of honor when we work with a great athlete, and I've had the opportunity to work with dozens of really famous international athletes. More recently, John Jones from the UFC, Philadelphia Eagles offensive lineman, Lane Johnson, of course. The list goes on and on. But these people are the easiest to train. I got to be honest with you. They're the most disciplined, they're the most consistent, they're the most genetically gifted. That generally, if the reason they reached out to you, they trust you, and so they'll listen to what you tell them to do, and they'll just do it. And so it's rewarding, but it's easy. The harder challenge, of course, is our Gen Pop, our soccer moms and dad bots. They're the more difficult client. They need more help. They need with little things, that we might take for granted. They don't necessarily enjoy exercising or lifting weights, God forbid, for a lot of the soccer moms. And they got busy schedules. They've got kids and careers and this whole dieting thing, and they want to enjoy their lives. They're not committed to some sort of fitness journey necessarily, or competitive athletics, and they like to go out with their friends and socialize and actually live and enjoy their free time. And so I think that is a more challenging group to work with, certainly rewarding, particularly when they see improvements in their health and energy levels. And they use words like life-changing a lot, and that's exciting to me to see, even if they don't become have a six-pack and some cover model, but if they lose 20 pounds and correct metabolic syndrome and fatty liver and reduce blood pressure and just generally feel better and optimize their sleep and have more energy, I mean, that's a lot more rewarding, I think, than a trophy or a title. To me, it is now, at least in my old age, as I get soft.
I mean, Stan, I don't even have a six-pack, so these soccer moms are already beating me. I mean, guys, we are talking to the White Rhino. Now, Stan, it has been one of the biggest honors and privileges talking to you, and I know you are a busy guy. But before we get you out of here, are you down for some rapid-fire questions?
Oh, I don't know. Go ahead. I'm terrible at these.
Oh,
I'm always vacillating in between trying to make sure my answers are nuanced enough for everyone. So let her rip.
all right. I'm sure you'll do fine. Favorite cheat meal? Favorite cheat meal, but I was gonna say, is that even allowed on the vertical diet?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a calorie equation first and foremost. I do enjoy pizza. It doesn't like me. I've said that. I try and eat foods I like, not foods. What do I say? What's my quote? I got to remember it. I don't eat foods I like. I eat foods that like me, and I make that decision about an hour after I eat. So most of the time, I choose how I'm going to feel later over how it tastes right now. But the exceptions will be a good pizza, and one of the major exceptions is Firehouse Restaurant in down at Gold's Gym Venice, down near Gold's Gym Venice. I've been going there since the late 80s. I used to drive down there. I'd take a road trip from Eugene, Oregon, all the way down to LA, just so I could watch the guys in the early 90s train, all the people that I enjoyed seeing in the magazines. And I would go to Firehouse just like all of them used to do. Flex used to eat there 6 times a day. They have a bowl there called the Bob Bowl that Bob Ciccarillo used to eat there so much they named a bowl after him. But I would go there and I'd get their breakfast. It was the pancakes with the blueberry and the banana compote cooked inside, not on top, but cooked inside. And sure enough, an hour later, I'd be sprinting to the bathroom. But that's just the price I'll pay. So that's my long answer. Sometimes it's pizza. Sometimes I just can't stray from a good Firehouse breakfast.
I think I'd pay the price too. If that just sounds too damn good.
Yep.
We're gonna switch away from food because now you're making me hungry. Stan. Powerlifting or bodybuilding?
I tell you what, every time I competed, I got tired of what I was competing in and couldn't wait to start the other sport. I went back and forth for a reason. So I got to tell you, I like the training more than the competing.
Wow.
And the last 30 days before a powerlifting meet or a bodybuilding show, I was miserable and I couldn't wait to get over it and get started on the next sport. And so I don't have a preference, to be honest with you. Obviously, powerlifting is where I kind of am most well known for. But bodybuilding, and I think the combination of the two is what kind of gave me my popularity. The world's strongest pro bodybuilder, the spreads in muscular development and Flex magazine always had a lot to do with how strong I was. The comparisons to Ronnie Coleman for strength, which is an honor. Those kinds of things I think gave me a bigger platform than I would have earned in either sport if I had just done them exclusively.
I love it. I love it. Stan, this is going to be, I don't know what to expect from these ones. Squat or bench press?
A squat for sure. My bench is gone. I benched over 600 pounds in many competitions, and I would bench over 500 pounds every week for over 20 some years just in training. I just loved it. But then I tore my rotator cuff on a low bar squat, and I haven't been able to bench as much as well ever since. I'm lucky if I can get, a mid 400 bench these days. Listen to me, 54 years old. I got a 450 bench and I'm whining and crying about it like it's nothing. But the squat, to me, even though my legs have always been my weak point, I always loved the squat. I set that world record at the 854 pound squat with no knee wraps. And I was over 40 years old at the time. I just love the way it feels. I love the benefit, the overall body benefit. It's nothing like the squat.
I'm right. This is an interesting question. Lift a PR in powerlifting, and this is going to be a hypothetical part 2, or hypothetically see your alma mater, Oregon, beat the Washington Huskies in the National College Championship.
I take the PR, man. I got to be honest with you. I don't watch much sports. I've always followed athletes kind of individually rather than teams. And when I work with athletes, I work with individuals. I haven't been, since I was a high school soccer coach. I trained a lot of the University of Oregon football and track athletes, but I didn't train the University of Oregon teams. I just worked with the individuals. So to me, it's always about seeing what I can do one-on-one with folks. And there's great coaches out there, and hats off and much respect to the people that can handle a big group of athletes like that. But it's not me. I'm a one-on-one guy.
I thought that was going to get you a little more thinking, but I mean, I like the answer, so it's acceptable. The last two are Underdog Talk classic questions. First one, talk like Rocky Balboa for a whole year or have to box Rocky in his prime?
I think I would box him. I'm just because he wasn't really a boxer. And for those people who don't know, Sylvester Stallone's kind of tiny. He just is, he's about 5'7", 170 pounds. I mean, yeah, if you had said Mike Tyson, I'd be talking like Rocky for a year.
All right. Rich Gaspari was telling me when he was on the show that the reason Sylvester Stallone got jacked for Rocky is because of Rich. So I guess Rich Gaspari is small. I don't know about that.
I live in bizarro world. We just got done talking about Hafþór Björnsson, but to me, anybody under 200 pounds, I'm probably not too worried. I shouldn't say that because now we've got, of course, these damn MMA fighters that are just ridiculous, and those dudes. I mean, that'd be a different story. But yeah, sorry, Sylvester Stallone doesn't scare me.
That's fair. He's an actor. All right, that's fair.
Much respect. Yeah, he's done a great job. But yeah.
Final question. Now, this is a big one, Stan. Pull-ups or chin-ups?
I used to love chin-ups, man. And then I told you after my shoulders started getting a little tired, if I try and do a reverse grip pull-up now at full extension, I just did this 2 weeks ago. I was in the gym and I thought I'm going to do some pull-ups. And sure enough, at full extension, I hate to use the word impinge, but my shoulder was irritated for a damn week. It was sore. I could hardly lift my arm. And so, yeah, chin-ups for me now. And that's what I'm assuming. A pull-up is a reverse grip, chin over the bar, and a chin-up. What should I say? A pull-up. A chin-up, yeah, is palms facing you and getting your chin up over the bar, yeah. And then a pull-up would be hands forward. So I'm a pull-up guy nowadays. It doesn't bother my shoulders.
And I guess that question doesn't even relate to you. I mean, you're just lifting some big-ass weights out here. So those little exercises do not matter to you. But Stan, it has been such an honor and privilege to talk to you. Now, before we go, is there anything you want to plug where we can find the vertical diet, where we can find your content, where we can find your highlights?
Yeah, everything's at Stan Efferding. You can Google it. StanEfferding.com is my website. And I, of course, have the Vertical Diet ebook. It's been my most popular book. We've have tens of thousands of people all over the world now who have downloaded that and utilized it with great feedback. At Stan Efferding's Instagram. I try and post content on there. I've got some great free videos on YouTube, just YouTube Stan Efferding, and I put out a bunch of Rhino's rants. And of course, one of my biggest, most popular seminars was in Iceland with Hafþór. If you want to look at you could just Google or YouTube Stan Efferding Iceland, and that's almost 7 million views now. Over 2 hours, I go through every aspect of the vertical diet step by step, which actually prompted people to buy my book because it was all kind of there for them as an easy reference and resource step by step. So that's where you find me. Stan Efferding's always the spot.
So I know what I'll be doing after this podcast, watching that one and then looking at the vertical diet. So I better go because I got a lot of reading to do now.
Yeah, I got to say this. The vertical diet, when I originally launched it around the time that I put that video out with Hafþór, was about 5 years ago. I've since it's what do you say? It's a living document. It's evolved. I came out with the vertical diet 2.0 and now the 3.0 version. So I've updated it, changed some things, expanded it. It's over 225 pages with, as I mentioned, well over 200 references to peer-reviewed articles and videos and research. So, and I'll be putting out a vertical diet 4.0 soon. And each update is free to anybody who purchased a previous book. It's a username and password access. So anything I add to it becomes immediately available to you as a quote unquote member with a one-time purchase of the ebook. So
I like it, Stan. Inflation did not get to you and the vertical diet. Let's go.
yeah,
Love it. I love it. But again, Stan, has been such an honor. Guys, go check out Stan's content. It'll be in the bio. I mean, this vertical diet is going to change my digestion. So that's all I'm going to say. I won't be running to the bathroom anymore, hopefully. And I got to go try out this Firehouse place because that just sounds amazing.
oh, it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to. But until next time, guys, Underdog out.